All right, good morning. We'll get started with going over Intacct reports. For the agenda today, we'll be looking at the accounts payable check register report and two reports through the general ledger, the account balances report and the general ledger report. And we'll see how those three can tie together. So for this, we're just jumping right into Intacct. So we're going to start with the accounts payable check register. And if you haven't used it before, we're going to our menu to accounts payable, registers, and check register. If you haven't run it before or you need some help running the report, on screen there is a help and support button on any Intacct page. And we go there, we can ask for help on this page. And it's actually going to bring up the Intacct help guide on what the check register is. So it gives us a smaller overview of what it is to view and output a check register based on entries to suit company needs, how to view it monthly, and how to customize the report. Basically everything we're going to do now, but that's available for you. And off to the side, you can see a list of other reports available through accounts payable that can be available to you as well. So check register defaults always to the current month. That's a setting that can't be changed. So if you're not looking for something for the current month, then we need to make a change either to the reporting period or to override this part by putting in a start and end date. So for this, I'm actually just going to leave it at current month and then today's date that it defaults to. We have an opportunity here to filter the report by choosing a range of vendors or a specific vendor. So today I'm using Cherry Todd. And so it's going to be limited to just returning checks issued to Cherry Todd. I'm using a demonstration account that has user level access, so probably the most common access here for the tribe. So anything I'm doing today is something we all can do as users. I'm using the general checkbook and then all programs for this one. You can use your specific program, or if you have access to multiple programs, you can choose all. Same thing with checkbook. I'm using specifically one checkbook. If you had access to multiple checkbooks, you could pull from the list of checkbooks to select that. So we're looking for Cherry Todd checks issued this current month through the general account and all programs. If we were looking up a specific check, we wanted to know more information about that, we can enter that check number or a range of check numbers by using those boxes there, or leave it blank for any check number to come up. There's also a button, if you haven't used it before, show details won't be selected, so all this stuff will be grayed out. But we can use to show details to include on this report more information like the account number used, or to specifically choose the account number that we want to look at. So we'll run it first without show details, and then we'll come back and add details to the report. We can look to only see voided checks. So if we're looking for a period of time, we're sorting out our expenses and that kind of stuff, we want to just see voids, we can do that. We can see just check transactions, which is now important since we pay a lot of our utility providers and some other vendors by bank transfer. If we don't want to include those types of payments, only strictly checks, then we can just select that. If we want to see the reconciliation status, meaning has that check been confirmed through the bank as being cashed, then we can check that box to have that included. And if we're using that, do we want to see the reconciliation state? Do we want all of it? Do we want just in transit, meaning those checks that haven't cleared the bank? Or do we want to see only the checks that have cleared? So I'm leaving it on all. And then lastly, how do we want to sort this check? By vendor, check number, vendor ID, the date, amount, account number. So we can modify the report a little bit and how we want to see that information. How do we want to group the information that's coming out? So we can make any of those selections there. So let's take a look at the report just by running view. So we get a list of what the general fund has issued so far this month. We don't have details selected, so we just see the date, bank information, the check number, or if it's an ACH payment, we've electronically paid the vendor, we get a long number, which is the ACH number according to our records, the amount, and whether or not it's cleared the bank. We're running for the month of July, so that information wouldn't be available to us yet. If it has cleared, it'll give you the month and the year that the check had cleared the bank. When the bank accounts are reconciled, they're done so after the month is complete. So for example, we just finished the month of June. So all the bank statements will be getting sent to us, or becoming available, and now through the rest of the month, each bank account would get reconciled to determine, did this payment clear the bank, or whatever payments that we're looking for. So it's the information we can see. If we needed to see details, we could click show details. We don't have to make a selection here. We can still leave that blank if we wanted all the checks. So when we go to view, we have a lot more information that's available to us. Now we have the account number that was used. We have the bill number, which on like the voucher document is the vendor document number. So we see that listed. So if we're looking to see if we've paid a certain bill, if we're including the statement number, invoice number, that kind of stuff in our vendor document numbers, you can certainly run this report and then search the page for it. And so you can search the page not through Intacct, but through your browser. If we hit Control F, it brings a little search bar here. So if I was looking for an invoice that was number 25043, it's going to highlight where that combination appears. Easy way to find out which check number paid the bill. That's Control F on your keyboard. But we get more information here. Now we know the method of payment, so we can see ACH, so that confirms that those long numbers were an electronic payment. We can see even the memo, whatever we put in the memo is visible here as well. And then the program that was used, the checkbook, and then a link to the bills page. And the voucher is what creates the bill, so that would just link to the document created by the voucher. We can modify this so we don't have to use more than one account. Say we were just trying to reconcile our utilities payments for the month. So we'll customize this report. We have details selected, so we're going to use the utilities account number. And when we go to view the report, it's going to change a little bit. 2 payments are going to drop off. Now we just have the 3 payments issued to Cherry Todd for the month of July using account 68100. And because I used the selection for all programs and the account I'm using has access to all programs, we can see 3 different programs had paid Cherry Todd throughout the month. And from here, we have some options on what we want to do with the report. If we want to print it as a PDF, either to save it to our desktop or to actually print it, we can choose the print option. You can process and store this report. It'll only save with the current settings we've used, so it's not like it's going to keep updating. But if we use process and store, we can put this out there and say, you know what, on August 1st, 2022, I want this report to run. Current month is selected, so I know on August 1st, if I run it with current month, that means it's going to run this check register the current month as of August 1st. So we'd want to make sure we're using the right selection. So if we wanted just the month of July, we could override that and put in a start and end date July 1st to July 31st, and then run the report on August 1st so that it'll automatically generate for us. We don't have to remember to come back and run the report. Store it in Intacct and then give it a name and whatever format you'd like the report to be in. We can email this report. So if we have what we're looking for, now we're sending this to, maybe it's to our vendor. We got a statement of accounts for them and it looks like they're missing some of our payments. Well, we can come here and choose their email, give it a subject, format we want to send it in, and send a message. And then Intacct will process your request and then send it to whatever email address you used here. It's not limited to an Intacct user. It's any valid email address. Or we can always export the report to a different format if we're going to use it for something else. All right, any questions over the check register? If you have them, please send them to the chat box. So we're going to go ahead and leave this at where it's at. Now we're going to look at the account balances report. And I'm going to leave this page up, so I'm going to duplicate the Intacct tab so we can run account balances while still having the check register visible. So in this one, we'll find account balances report under accounts, under general ledger, the reports area, and account balances. So this is kind of similar to a trial balance, similar to the dimension balances report. We see it defaults to the current month. If we're unsure of what this report is later and we want to learn more about it, I can go to help and support, help on this page. And what do I want to see about this report? About the report, how to filter, how to customize, how to format the report. So if we go to about, gives us a good explanation. It views balances of accounts by a single account, a range of accounts, or a group. We could include or exclude statistical accounts, which almost everyone doesn't use statistical accounts outside of help and community services. We can specify to specific locations or departments, meaning checkbooks and programs, and then other information that we can use. It even tells us who usually uses this report. Budget planners, forecasters, CFOs, auditors who need the current information about the company based on account balances. So often I'll get asked, especially when we're preparing a financial report to one of our funding agencies or maybe to a committee, how can I figure out how much money I spent in a specific month? We all know the financial reports, like the fiscal year report. If you run it as of today, you're not going to see May's balances or anything like that. You're going to see the expenses for the fiscal year and then whatever the current month is for the report we're running. We can use this report to get that same information. So we're going to try and see if we can tie out to what our check register says. So we're going to leave it to current month. We're using that utilities account number, so I've got that selected here. But we can use any range of accounts or a single account like I'm using, or a group of accounts, like if we wanted to show all of our expenses. The account group would be all expense GL accounts, or you could use all expenses, whichever one of these two. The all expense GL accounts is the one I created to use tied to all of our financial reports. So I'm comfortable using that one because I know for sure that's going to display what's on our financial reports. This is like a canned Intacct setting. But I've got utility selected. If I was using statistical accounts, there's my opportunity to select that. Back to the same selections, all programs and checkbooks, or all programs, checkbook 3. The check register, we can't specify a funding source. Here we can. I didn't have that selection, so I'm going to leave that blank, so any funding source that fits this combination of program and checkbook is going to work. We were using Cherry Todd as our vendor. So we have them selected, and we didn't have any other selections, so we're going to leave those blank, but you can see there's other ways for us to filter the report. If we're using the customer field and we wanted to include a specific customer, or we were looking at maybe our employee expenses, we can search by employee instead. And then we get some more information. Do we want to see zero balance accounts? My selection here is do not show. So if the utilities line had no balance, the report would say that there was no data found. So if you get that message, you can come back here and check this and make sure, okay, maybe I want to see that there was activity. I want to see the debits and credits. We can change our selection. Do we want to see a summary or a detail? And are we retaining the year-to-date balances? So let's leave some of these in place. We'll run the report and then we'll run it again with some changes to here. So the report runs. We have retain year-to-date balances selected. So first of all, it's giving us our utility expenses that have been booked all the way through June 30th. So we can see what we've started the month of July in our total expenses. And so our closing balance is also going to include this amount plus our debits less our credits gives us our closing balance. So we can see we've booked expenses totaling $743.98. Our check register totals $743.98. So we're looking pretty good here. We know that there hasn't been changes to our funds. There wasn't a journal entry that reclassified an item. So it's not tying out to our check register, that kind of thing. We see everything balances. We're happy there. We can always click on the 743.98 to go to our general ledger to see the detail of this, but we're not going to do that quite yet. And then we have the same options we had on the check register. We can print this report, process and store it if we want to run that later for a later time. If you want to email this report to yourself or to another person or to multiple people, we can certainly choose email. Or if we're going to export this and use it in a different format, or maybe we want to add highlights and that kind of stuff to the report, always an option. So let's rerun this report and make a couple of changes to those selections down here. Let's uncheck retain year-to-date balances. We run the report again. Now we've lost what our total expenses were leading up to this. And our balance now is simply just the debit and credit activity for the month. And what we'd expect to see in the credit column here could be one of two things. Number one, if we voided one of these checks, we're going to have a credit issue to this account, so our expenses aren't recording an expense that has been voided. Or if your program monitor has had to reclassify the expense because a different funding source should have been used, we might see a credit there. And then it would be debited to a different fund. The other option we have is detail. So if I use that as the option, run the report, we get a little bit more information than just a summary total. We get the day of each of the charges. We see what program and then the memo. So not a whole lot of detail, but certainly a little more than the summary. And then we have the same subtotal 743.98 that we see from our check register. So even though we changed some of our options, our balances haven't changed yet. So for those of you listening, can we think of any other reason other than a journal entry where the expense total may be greater than our check register total for the month? The first one would be if we accrue our expenses. So after fiscal year 22 is over, we might be paying a fiscal year 22 bill, but now it's in fiscal year 23. So we're going to date our voucher for September 30th. The expense is going to post to September 30th. Our check, however, will run on cash basis, and the check will be dated for whatever day the check was ran on. So in those circumstances, September's expenses would show a higher amount than the check register for the month of September. And the other time we may see that happen is when the Lynette approves the voucher, but the check isn't yet approved. So it hasn't had time to hit the check register yet. So just be aware of some of those timing issues as you're comparing your balances to the check register or that kind of thing. All right, so we're going to duplicate this again, and now we're going to look at the general ledger report. We'll get into the detail of the activity we've been looking at this entire time. So we're going to go to the menu to general ledger, under reports, general ledger. Same thing as the other two reports. It defaults to the current month. We can always change what the current month selection is, but no matter how many times we come back, it'll always be current month. The help and support help on this page takes us to the Intacct guide for the same information where we can see about the general ledger report, what it does, so we can see you can click individual transactions to drill down to their information pages. A description of who needs the report and the information that those people would get from it. That's pretty much all of us. We all need, as users at some point, to access the general ledger report. And then this goes on to tell you what's in the report, so what do the columns mean, and then how to filter, how to customize. So we're going to keep it at current month. We're still going to use the utilities account number, so I've got that selected. And so we're going to skip over like account group we don't need to fill in. The first field as users that we need to worry about is the program, so I'm using all programs again. And checkbook 3. So you can use whatever checkbook you have access to, or you can say all checkbooks. I'm not going to have a funding source selection because I want it to be for any funding source that's possible with data that would match this stuff. Cherry Todd is our vendor. And of course, if we were running it for other things, for customers, our staff, that kind of stuff, we could use the other filters to change the output of this report. Next thing is this dimension values area. If we haven't ran this report before, this is going to be blank. It's going to say select. Or if you've used it before, I had some selections there. This is a sticky area, so whatever we've selected and ran a report on, Intacct will at least remember our selections from the last time, and that's what's going to fill in there. And this lets us choose the different dimensions that we have in use from Intacct. So we can include stuff like the program ID, our program name, checkbook ID, saying we wanted the vendor name and the funding source. So we wanted to see that information in the report. If I don't select that, that's not going to show on this general ledger report. I want to see that for this case, so I've got that selected. Anything here on the left side is stuff we haven't added, but are available for us to move and select. So I've got our option selected. Like the account balance report, we can display zero balance accounts or not. And there's some minor differences between like the summary and details report, so we can see what that is. And do we want to see the bill numbers or the reference numbers? So I have bill number selected. And then we have some other options. Do we want to see the transaction number? That's the journal entry number, unfortunately not the purchasing transaction number. If we're using exporting this to CSV, do we want to see the account number on each line? And stuff about retaining balances. How do we want to group this? Checkbook, program, checkbook and program, program and checkbook. And then some other options that we have on screen. So I'm going to go ahead and run this report with what we have selected. And so here we are. I included the bill number. So if I look up this line and we go back to our check register, we can see there's the bill number here. So I'm tying my posted expenses to my check register. And then we see that it was a bill. Here's the dimension stuff I've added. So I added program, program name, checkbook, vendor name, funding source ID. How that was created was a journal entry through accounts payable journal, and there's the amount that was debited for the expense. And there's a question, is the bill number same as the vendor document number on a voucher? Yes, it is. If we're at the general ledger report screen, and if I click on the date or the dollar amount, that lets us drill into a little bit more information here. So let's click on the date 7/6. Here's the journal entry that was created from our voucher. And here's the link to the voucher. And so when we view the voucher that was prepared, there's that bill number, and then here's the voucher, and there's that vendor document number, which is the same as that bill number, same as what's on the general ledger report, same as what's on the check register report. So we can see and tie all these things together to make sure the stuff that we're paying, the bills that we're expecting to see, all tie out through all the same periods of time, same amounts and all that stuff. So let's get back to the general ledger report. We have some of those formatting options that we can choose. So like if I did a summary instead of the details, I'm using a summary report. So now the bill number or the vendor document number no longer appears on the report. So the summary gives us some good information, but might not be helpful in researching, as being pointed out in the chat. That just reinforces using your actual invoice numbers in the vendor document field. So you can research what's been paid or research what's happened to that bill or that invoice as we see it through Intacct. But the summary one gives us a little bit less information, which could be fine. It's a little more clean looking. So less stuff to print if we're printing our general ledger report or exporting that to Excel. We have the same options as we did for the other reports to print, process and store, email, or export. Now I'm going to get rid of this selection for the account number. And we're going to choose all accounts, but leave everything else the same so we can see how these transactions traveled through Intacct. Number one, we can see we're no longer limited to just utilities. Now we have some Rosebud Fair expenses that have cut in. So if we come over here, that doesn't include those expenses because we're wanting all accounts to show. But if we wanted to see how specifically those utilities payments went through all of the general ledger report, there's one filter we can add but still use all of our accounts, and that's the item ID. That's the line item we use on our purchasing documents. So on our voucher, we use line item ID 68100. So as the voucher is approved and a bill is created, that carries over to that bill, which carries over to the journal entries made for the check. So I'm adding the item ID and rerunning the report. Okay. So we have our utilities, $743.98. Accounts balances report, $743.98. Check register, $743.98. All tied together. Our accounts payable account. Overall, the balance is $0 because we've had a voucher, or the voucher was approved. This is the offsetting entry to the debit to utilities. We debit utilities and credit accounts payable. Once the accounts payable bill becomes paid, the next entry is to debit accounts payable and then reduce our cash. So the fact that this doesn't have a balance because our debits and credits equal tells us that all of our payments have been paid. There's nothing waiting for the treasurer's approval. And then lastly, there's the cash activity that's occurred where we've reduced cash by $743.98, which is a common theme running through this whole thing. And then there's the total of all of that activity balancing to $0. which we spend all of our time doing, trying to make sure everything balances out. And then when the audit occurs, we're looking for those types of balances, especially in areas like accounts payable. All right, do we have any questions over what we've gone through? Or is there a different account or stuff that we want to see? We can also select multiple accounts if we don't want to do all. So if we cleared the item selection, we just wanted multiple accounts up here. We don't want to do a range. We wanted to select our utilities, our accounts payable, and I don't remember what that account number was. Rosebud Fair expenses. So we've got all three of those selected. We don't want a whole bunch of other accounts or just one single one. We can make that selection, rerun the report, and now look, it's in the order we've added those numbers. So utilities is on top, then accounts payable, then Rosebud Fair expenses. So we can see here our accounts payable doesn't balance right now. There's a $60 credit balance because we have a non-PO voucher that's not yet approved. All right, I didn't see any questions coming in. So it was just a brief overview of these reports today. So everybody, thank you for your time. I'll be sure to email out the link and the Google slide deck that I use once the recording becomes available to me. Thank you and enjoy the rest of your day.